Hi, this is reigning rider Kendall Shiner, and you're listening to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast hosted by Auburn Elvis. Thank you very much.
Hello, this is Auburn Elvis, and that pleasant voice you heard in the intro was UC Davis reigning MOP of the weekend, Kendall Shiner. And she was nice enough to record that intro for free. I did not have to pay her $10, so take that, Bert Auburn. Yeah, so basically the way that worked is I put out a call for any UC Davis riders that might be willing to record the intro to the show, and she was gracious enough to help out. We'll talk more about Kendall and company later on, but first, there are some meet recaps from Thursday that we need to go over first. All right, so first we're going to look at TCU at Delaware State. This was one of those postponements that had happened from the week before because of weather. The first event here was fences, and TCU jumped out to a 3-1 lead with this event, and they really never looked back. Berube, Scully, Baxter, and Manog all got points, and just like that, the number one team in the nation was going to town. But Delaware State's Olivia Brown not only won her point, but also took the MOP, so good job there to her. Horsemanship was next, and here was the highlight of the day for the Hornets. Basically, DSU's Zener, Grogan, and John kept the dream alive, thinking maybe they could pull off the upset. They won the event 3-2, but Shea Graham won the MOP on the other side for TCU. So at the half, it was 6-4 TCU, but that lead was only going to get bigger from here on. On the flat, TCU's Zacharick, Weatherly, and Scully won their points to give the Frogs a 3-2 result in the event. Once again, the team with the fewer points overall actually had the MOP ride. And here that would be DSU's Victoria Croston. So on we go to the final event, reining. There was still a slight chance that DSU could get the upset, but back and forth scoring pretty much gave the Horned Frogs the margin they needed for victory. TCU's Dukes, Meadow, and McAllister won their points, with McAllister also taking home the MOP honors. So for everyone that has tuned out during the recap so far, the final score was basically 12-8 TCU. And on we go to UT Martin versus TCU. Now this one was going to be a little bit harder to follow because as it was unfolding online, I'm not really sure of what the order was, but my guess is it was probably the reverse of the previous meet, since you basically would have to reset up all the rings, and it would just be easier to leave them as they were at the end of the previous one and then work backwards. So that's what I think they did. So based on that, here's how I think it went down. First would have been the flat. This was back and forth, each team getting a pair of points, and this was a 4-on-4 rider meet. So UT Martin's Sydney Hott did distinguish herself by getting the MOP in this event. Then we had reining. There was another 2-2 split. TCU's Georgia Meadows got the MOP here. So at the half, everything was all knotted up at 4-all. Next up was fences, and here's where TCU sort of started pulling away. Scully, Berube, and Baxter took 3 of the 4 points, with Scully getting the MOP. Horsemanship was a little bit closer, but TCU did take the majority of points and maintain their lead, with Dukes, Meadows winning their matchups, and Meadows, I think, actually got the MOP there. So anyway, the final was 9-6 TCU, which is probably a little bit closer than we expected, but when you're on the road, you will take it. Now, that's all of Thursday, so let's go to Friday. UT Martin at Delaware State. Now, this meet had some big early season conference implications in the ECAC. DCU had beaten Minnesota Crookston 2 weeks ago, so they are technically the number one team in the ECAC going in. So let's see how that held up. The first event was fences, and UT Martin jumped all over the Hornets from the get-go. Hott, Becker, Gilman, and Kane all notched points for the Skyhawks. But DSU's lone point by Brown was also the MOP ride here. Now in horsemanship, UT Martin again took the advantage. Bailey, Davis, and Cedar all won their points, with Kate Davis also getting the MOP here. So just like that, the Skyhawks had a big 7-3 lead at the half. In the second half, the Skyhawks won another event with a 3-2 advantage on the flat. Here we had Hott, Weiss, and Kane. They won their points. DSU's Olivia Brown got the MOP here. Then we go on to reining. Very next point went to UC Martin, and that sort of sealed the win. Here we had Davis, Podvinsky, Malone getting points, with Aubrey Malone getting the MOP. And that makes the final score UT Martin 13, Delaware State 7. So the big takeaways from these three meets are probably that UT Martin looks to be the main contender to SMU in the ECAC, even though we have not seen anything from newcomer Barry yet. But I feel pretty confident that the Skyhawks are going to be the main challenger there. Delaware State is better than Minnesota Crookston in the conference, but they're going to need to tighten some things up if they want to move any higher up into the conference standings. And of course, TCU, they're number one in the nation. They went on the road. They looked good enough to get the easy wins. And sometimes, good enough is all you're asking for. Speaking of which, let's check in on how Auburn's road meet went out west. Now, first thing, Auburn went to UC Davis. And I'll tell you, in last week's meet previews, I cannot understate how not worried I was for Auburn going into this meet. I mean, Auburn wasn't the number one team in the nation, but, they did just win at Georgia. And I don't believe the Tigers have ever lost to an unranked opponent, or at least not in a long while. So this was, it's going to be easy, right? Well, let's get on to the action. First up was fences. Auburn was a pretty big favorite here. They did good, but maybe not great as you would expect. They took the event 3-2 with Stearns, Steckbeck, and Ferrigno, each getting points. Ferrigno won the MOP. Okay, not bad. Everything's going great. On to horsemanship. Again, Auburn wins this one 3-2 with Alexia Tordoff, Friedenberg, and Spack. Spack also won the MOP here. So again, Auburn could have had more points, but this is exactly how the Georgia meet started out. So having a 6-4 halftime lead, probably got nothing to worry about, right? Well, on we go to the flat. Now, there was a lot of ties, there was some re-rides, and just stuff that slowed everything down in this meet, just slowed it down to a crawl. So when this event was over, UC Davis had taken this event 2-1. Margaret Frank got her point and the MOP, and her teammate Sarah Gunnarsson also got a point. So only Auburn's Mary Grace Seegers got a point in this one for the Tigers. Then reining happened. Auburn had a lot of good scores in these other three events. So really, if they could just get 2 points here in reining, that was going to at least give them a tie. And they would probably win the tiebreaker because there was a pretty low score on one of the rides previously for UC Davis. But alas, UC Davis took this event 4-1 and also the meet. So shout out to Aggies Langbaum, Newkirk, Dylan, and the MOP rider, plus she's also the renowned podcast welcomer, Kendall Shiner. Her ride sealed Auburn's fate and helped pull off what is probably the biggest win in UC Davis history. So you really have to tip your hat to the Davis ladies here. I can remember it was not that long ago when you would listen to Tom O'Mara and Sissy Wicks over on the Plaidcast, and they'd be interviewing folks from UC Davis program, and they'd all be talking about how excited they were to be getting going in their first season in the NCEA. And now here they are, they're out there beating Auburn. So you just wonder, where's the time gone? For Auburn, you really can't do much but just take this loss on the chin and hop on the bus and get ready to face Fresno State the next day. So that's what they did. And moving right along, Auburn at Fresno State. Fences and horsemanship were up first. This sounds familiar, I get it. So let's see how it goes this time. So Auburn won fences 5-0. So right out of the gate, they're not playing around. They got Ferrigno as the MOP, then Steckbeck, then Seegers, then Stearns, and Kurtz. All of them won their points. Also, Gracie Pearson rode in the exhibition head-to-head, and she would have won that too if that had counted. So we'll say that's a decent effort to start off. On we go to horsemanship. Here, Auburn's Pardoon, or Pardon, if you're like me. And then Olivia Tardoff, Friedenberg, and Spack, they all won some points. Also want to mention Fresno State's Hannah Bourgeois. She won her point and the event MOP. So good job. At the half, Auburn was up 9-1, and so that is how you build a big halftime lead, so that even if you have some trouble in the second half, you should still win. So let's see how that second half went for Auburn. Next up was flat. The first point was a tie, and then Auburn's Steckbeck took the next point. So that meant Auburn had essentially won the whole meet, but you got to keep going, and Auburn did keep going. Seegers took the next point and the MOP. Kurtz also took a point. That gave Auburn a 3-1 advantage in the event and 12 points overall. But wait, there's still more. Raining. Yes, raining is the last event here. So Auburn's Rainers kind of had something to prove, and Fresno State was the unlucky object of their ire. Auburn's Kammerer, Alexia Tordoff, Tesmer, and Buchanan all got points, with Tordoff doing Tordoff things like taking home the MOP. And but I will say Fresno State's Julianne Keeley tied Caroline Buchanan, and that way it prevented a complete sweep in reining. So if you're adding up everything at home, that makes the final score Auburn what? And Fresno State which could also be expressed as 16-2 in whole numbers. The takeaway here is probably that Fresno State just ran into a very determined Auburn team that was not in the mood for any of all that. Now, elsewhere around the country, South Dakota State beat the brakes off of Minnesota Crookston. So I'm just going to read off a whole bunch of Jackrabbit riders, and if you hear your name called, just turn to the person next to you and say, he's talking about me because I won. Callie Karbler, Samantha Hunsecker, Ella Dominicione, MOP Sophia Kregoski, Julia Verkhoven, Hannah Steele, MOP Michaela Haskins, Rachel Darby, Callie Fox, MOP Shelby Cochran, Annika Hansen, Lydia Locken, MOP Cassandra Townsend, and Isabella Rigg. So that's 14 names, 4 of which share the first name MOP, which is all kind of weird, but whatever. Good job, Jackrabbits. Next up, we have Sweetbriar at Dartmouth. Now, Sweetbriar was probably a little miffed about giving up another lead to Lynchburg last week, so they kind of took it out on poor Dartmouth. The first event was fences. I think it doesn't really matter because all the drama was gone once you got 2 points into either one of those events. So we'll just say it was fences. In fences, everybody from Sweetbriar was a winner. Emily Longus won the MOP, then Isabella Meserick, Wyatt Felton, and Catherine Ashton. On the flat, friend of the podcast and MOP Casey Freeberg won her point, with Atherton and Feltrin winning points, but no MOPs because they are not Casey Freeberg. And we're also going to applaud the efforts of Dartmouth's Chloe Terchinko. She got a point on the flat, and it gave her parents something to brag about that they did not get swept there. Also, I want to give a special shout out to whomever posted the official score sheet from this meet, because instead of like a PDF from a digital spreadsheet or a scan of the paper copy of the spreadsheet of the score sheet, this one was a cell phone photo of the score sheet sitting in someone's lap. So that is very meta, and I approve of that. Now, our final meet of the weekend was Baylor at Oklahoma State, or David versus Goliath all the other times that you never really hear about. So fences and horsemanship were up first, and there's no point in trying to build drama because all 10 of the points in the first half went to Oklahoma State. So at halftime, this one was basically over. One of Baylor's riders had a 0 already in her ride, so even if the Bears had pulled off some miracle second half comeback, the best they could get was a tie, and even then, with that 0, they were probably going to lose the tiebreaker. So, spoiler, there was no tie, and no tiebreaker was needed in this one, so we're just going to do a roll call of all the winners from Oklahoma State, and if I read your name, you get to now wave to all of those South Dakota State riders and say, hey, he's talking about me now. In fences, we have MOP Emma Packna, Sydney Ziegler, Sydney North, Sydney Hope King, and Sydney Hope King, a.k.a. Riley Hogan Esquire. In horsemanship, we have Maddie Fussell, JoJo Robertson, MOP Claire McDowell, Caroline Nielsen, and Peyton Baxter. Congratulations, ladies. You almost won the whole day just by yourselves, but you did need a tiny bit of help, and here's where you got it. Actually, you got a lot of help, whether you needed it or not. So you got it in reining from Molly Mitchell, Tristan Bagby, JoJo Robertson II, and Quincy Clark. So you ladies can all now stand up and take a bow for your 4-1 win in reining. But you'll notice it was not a sweep because there was a mop on the other side of the bracket. And it has been 4 years of me doing the podcast, and it has taken me this long to make a sweep mop MOP joke, but here we are. Anyway, so Baylor's Madeline Calloway was the MOP in reining on the other side there. So the score was now 14-1. It was not over yet. We still got one more event. On we go to the flat, where Oklahoma State, they only won this one 3-2. So we have Hannah Coleman, Hope King, and Grace McReynolds. They all won points, while Baylor's and Voorhees took home the MOP honors here. So now the meet was officially over, and the official score was a 17-3 blood sport. This was really kind of a disaster for Baylor. They were hoping that Oklahoma State was vulnerable because of that upset loss that they had to SMU a few weeks back. But no. Oklahoma State is still very good, and they really wanted you to know that. So now we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we will do some meet previews. Okay, we're back. Now, let's do those meet previews that I promised you. First, we're going to look at TCU at Baylor, which is happening this Friday. Baylor did not look great against Oklahoma State. TCU is undefeated. So, when you look at those two things alone, I think you have to go with the Horned Frogs. It's at Baylor, though, so I think it's probably going to be a little bit closer than it otherwise would be. Certainly closer than that Baylor-OSU meet was. I still like TCU, and I think they'll probably win by about 4 or 5 points. Next, Sweetbriar at Sacred Heart. Now, Sacred Heart figures to be better than Dartmouth this year, but that still probably isn't good enough to beat Sweetbriar. The Pioneers might be able to steal a few points here and there, but I think the Vixens still win this one by 3 or 4 points. Next, UT Martin at Auburn. The Tigers will be starting off the home schedule with the visiting Skyhawks coming to town. UT Martin will challenge Auburn a little bit in the flat and raining probably, but I don't expect another letdown performance from Auburn like what they had against UC Davis. I think Auburn probably wins by 5, 6, or maybe more points. Bridgewater College at Sewanee. Okay, now this is a cool matchup. Bridgewater had a nice first year. They pulled that upset of Sweetbriar. They got mysteriously erased from the record books. And then Sewanee also had a nice run into the postseason. They finished 4th nationally. So this one could be a really nice meet. I'm going to go ahead and give the edge to Sewanee because 1, their name is more fun to say. 2, it's at home. And 3, they probably have better riders. That last part is the key. Tigers by 2. Then we have the meet of the week, Texas A&M at Georgia. The Bulldogs lost a close one to Auburn 2 weeks ago, and the Aggies beat the heck out of South Carolina that same weekend. So, on paper, this one favors the Aggies. But I'll say that both teams have an even amount of talent, and so whichever team rides better is going to win, basically. I mean, that's what you say every meet, but anyway, you know what I mean when I say that. Heck, most of everybody listening to this are riders, so you already know what's going on. Anyway, back to the preview. I think Georgia is going to win at home, actually. All right, so there. I think they're going to pull off the big upset. It's probably going to be a 1-point win or maybe even a tiebreaker in the decision, but I'm going ahead and calling the upset for Georgia. So those are the upcoming meets to keep an eye on. So as we close out the show, we're going to do something a little different here. This week, my mom passed away, and I'd like to share a story about her that I think y'all will like. Now, of course, she knew about this whole Auburn Elvis thing. She was cool with it. She actually taught me how to use a sewing machine back when I was a kid. So really, all this dressing up stuff and the cool things I do, it wouldn't be possible without her. So I was going through the photos on her phone the other day, and I came across a bunch of photos from that one time that she went to an Auburn Equestrian meet. Now, my mom was a big Auburn fan, but her main sports were football and men's basketball. My folks had basketball tickets from like when I was a kid all the way up until basically right before Bruce Pearl got hired. Now, it had nothing to do with Bruce. They basically had gotten old enough that it was too uncomfortable for them to go to games and sit in the arena seating for 3 hours. So they let their tickets lapse and just watch games on TV, and that was fine for them. They still loved it. So back in 2020, when I was first getting into actually going to the meets and not just following it along online, I had sewed a whole bunch of these orange and blue stick horses. Now, the idea that I had at the time was I would make, a bunch of them and I would give them out to fans and, get people cheering and all that good stuff. But when I got there, it wasn't that kind of a scene, so I didn't really do that. But instead, what I did was I went over and I found Director of Operations, Morgan McQuay, who is now Morgan Dick, and I showed her the horses, and I asked her, hey, would y'all want to give these away as the MOP gifts? And she said, sure. So for the rest of that season, I had sewed a bunch of them and I gave them to Auburn, and they were the official MOP gifts that year. So Morgan and them, they would basically ask me and they say, well, do you want money for these? And I'm like, no. But I'll tell you what, when my wife comes along with me to these, she really would like to go over into the LeDub Lounge, which is, for those of y'all who don't know, this is the a lounge. It's got fancy seating. A lot of the top programs have these where the donors will provide the money to build a nice fancy area with catered food and drinks, and it's better seating and it's luxurious, and you basically have to be a rich person to be able to get in there. And so what I asked was, hey, for these stick horses, could I get, my wife in there? And they were like, sure. So back to my mom. She knew about the whole stick horses thing and the MOP gifts, and so when I told her about the lounge, she was like, oh, well, I would go to an equestrian meet if I could get to sit in the fancy lounge. And so, again, I go back to Morgan and I say, hey, my folks are thinking about coming to a meet. Would it be okay if they could go into the lounge in exchange for the stick horses? And she was like, sure. So my folks came along with me to one of the equestrian meets that February and watched Auburn win. They had a really nice time. They especially enjoyed the lounge. My mom would always mention going to that meet and being in the lounge, and just what a nice memory it was. And so with all of that, I just want everybody to remember that when we go through all of this, what's really important here is that these college sports are about people that are actually, doing the sports and the larger community that's cheering them on. So yeah, we all want to win. We want to demonstrate athletic excellence and all that good stuff. But it's also about the impact that this is all having on the athletes' lives, their parents' lives, the lives of fellow students, and also the fans at large, because we're all really taking part in these events together. And so even if it's just this little old lady who knows nothing about horses, she's still able to sit inside a climate-controlled lounge eating free food, cheering on the athletes from her favorite school. And that's all for this episode of War Horses. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Thank you very much, Mom.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.